I still remember the smell of the coffee more than anything else. Funny, right? You'd think after a day like that, the thing that stays with me would be the noise or the smoke or the way people screamed. But no, it's the coffee. Cheap stuff from a paper cup, too hot, burning the roof of my mouth as I walked down toward the palace that morning. I keep thinking if I'd just waited 2 more minutes for it to cool, maybe I wouldn't have been standing exactly where I was when everything happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. It was a Tuesday, late spring. London does this thing in May where the sky can't decide what it wants to be, gray 1 second, blinding blue the next. That morning it was the blue kind, the good kind, the kind that brings the tourists out in their thousands, all of them pointing phones at things, all of them looking up instead of where they're walking. I'd come down from up north a few days before. My sister lives near Reading and I was visiting, and I thought, why not? I've never actually seen the changing of the guard. 41 years old and I'd never seen it. Born in this country and I'd never bothered. So I caught the early train, got off at Victoria, and walked the rest of the way with that scalding coffee in my hand. You could hear the crowd before you could see the palace. That low hum that big groups of people make. Hundreds of voices folding into one sound like the sea. There were families with prams. There were school groups in matching yellow vests, all roped together so they wouldn't wander off. There were couples taking selfies in front of the gates, and old men in folding chairs who looked like they came every single week. And then there were the guards. I'd seen them in pictures, obviously. Everyone has. The tall black hats, bearskin, someone told me later that's what they're called, and the red tunics so bright they almost hurt your eyes in the sun. But pictures don't do it. In person, there's something about how still they are. Unnaturally still. Like statues that breathe. You catch yourself staring, waiting for one of them to blink or shift his weight, and they just don't. They just stand there, eyes forward, while 100 phones flash in their faces. There was one in particular near the front. Young lad. Couldn't have been more than 22, 23. I noticed him because a kid, maybe 6 years old, was standing right in front of him making the most ridiculous faces, crossing his eyes, sticking his tongue out, doing that thing where you pull your ears out and go cross-eyed, and the guard didn't move, not even a twitch. The kid's dad was dying laughing behind his camera, and the little boy got more and more determined, and still nothing. Stone. I remember thinking, that's a strange kind of strength. To stand there and let the whole world poke at you and not give them a single inch. I didn't know yet how much that would matter. The crowd kept growing. By about 10:30 it was properly packed, shoulder to shoulder near the railings. I'd given up trying to get to the front and was standing back a bit, near the road, sipping my coffee and just taking it all in. That's when I noticed the woman. Now I don't like the word people throw around for women like her these days. You know the one. It's lazy and it gets slapped on anyone who's having a bad day. But I'll be honest, in this case it fit. It fit like a glove. She was somewhere in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. Big sunglasses pushed up into hair that had been styled within an inch of its life. Designer bag on her arm, the kind that costs more than my car. And she had this energy about her. This radiating sense that everyone around her was an obstacle put there specifically to annoy her. She was tugging a teenage girl along behind her, her daughter, I assumed, and the poor kid had that look. That mortified, please let the ground swallow me look that teenagers get when their parent is about to do something embarrassing in public. I watched the woman elbow her way toward the front, and I mean elbow. She wasn't saying excuse me. She wasn't waiting for gaps. She was just pushing, putting her shoulder into people, tutting loudly when they didn't move fast enough. An old man nearly lost his footing. A mum had to yank her toddler out of the way. The woman didn't even glance back. "Come on, Madison," she snapped at the girl. "I'm not standing at the back like a peasant. We did not fly all this way to look at the backs of people's heads." American accent. Loud. The kind of voice that's been trained by years of being listened to whether anyone wanted to or not. She got herself right up to the railing, planted her feet and started taking photos. Fine. Annoying but fine, Lots of people are pushy. I went back to my coffee. But here's the thing about the railings outside the palace. There's a route the guards take when they march, a path, and it's marked. There are these little signs, and there are men in different uniforms, police and other soldiers, whose whole job is to keep that path clear. Because when the guards march, they march. They don't slow down. They don't go around you. They don't say, mind your back. They expect that space to be empty, because for hundreds of years that space has always been empty. The woman had planted herself half on that path. A police officer noticed first. Calm bloke, maybe 50, the sort who's seen everything and is surprised by nothing. He walked over and said something to her quietly. I couldn't hear it from where I was, but I could read his body language. Polite. Hand gesturing for her to step back just a little. Just behind the line, madam, if you wouldn't mind. She didn't mind moving. She minded being told. I saw her whip her sunglasses off. I saw her point her finger right at the officer's chest. And then her voice carried across the whole crowd, clear as a bell. Do you have any idea how far we traveled to be here? Do you? I am not moving. I have just as much right to stand here as anyone else. You can't just tell people where to stand. This is a public street. The officer said something else, still calm, still patient. She wasn't having it. No, I'm done talking to you. Get your supervisor. Get someone in charge, because this is harassment. I'm being singled out. Madison, are you recording this? Record this. And the girl, God love her. She had her phone half raised and this expression of pure agony, like she would rather be anywhere on earth than there. People around them were shifting. You could feel the mood change. That awkward British thing where everyone goes quiet and pretends not to watch while watching very intently. A few people muttered. Someone behind me said, "Oh, here we go." A dad pulled his kids a little closer. The officer, to his credit, didn't raise his voice. He just stepped back, said something into his radio, and let her have her little patch of pavement for the moment. I think he knew. I think he knew what was coming and decided it wasn't worth the fight. Because the guards were about to march. You could hear it before you could see it. That sound. The crunch of boots hitting stone in perfect time. One sound made by many feet. It rolls toward you and you feel it in your chest before your ears even catch up. The crowd noise dropped. Phones went up. Everyone turned. And around the corner they came. I'd never seen it before, like I said, and nothing prepares you for it. The precision. Every step landing on the exact same beat. Arms swinging to the exact same height. Faces forward, blank, fixed on something 1,000 miles in the distance. It's almost frightening how together they are. Like one creature with 20 pairs of legs. Leading them, or near the front anyway, was the young guard. The same one the little boy had been pulling faces at. I recognized him by something about his jaw, the way he held it. He was marching straight down that cleared path. The path the woman was standing half across. And she didn't move. I think, and this is just my guess, I think she expected him to stop, to go around, to wait, to do the thing that any normal person does when they're walking towards someone in the street, which is adjust. We all do it. It's so automatic we don't even notice. You drift left, they drift left, you both laugh, you sort it out. But that's not how this works. The guards don't stop. They will not stop. It's not arrogance, it's not rudeness, it's discipline drilled into them so deep it's not even a choice anymore. The march is the march. The path is the path, and anyone standing in it had better understand that very, very quickly. There's a phrase they shout. I learned it afterward. The guards, when someone's in the way, they bellow it at the top of their lungs without breaking stride. Make way for the Queen's Guard, or the King's now, of course. It's loud. It's sudden. It's meant to be. It's meant to snap you out of whatever you're doing and get you to move fast. The young guard saw her. I watched it happen. His eyes never left the horizon, but somewhere in his head he clocked her, that woman planted in his path with her phone up and her chin out, daring him. And he let it rip. Make way. I have never heard a human being make a sound like that. It came up from his boots. It echoed off the stone. Birds went up off the rooftops. The woman jumped about a foot in the air. Her sunglasses dropped out of her hand and clattered onto the pavement. Madison flinched so hard her phone nearly went flying. But she still didn't move. She froze. That's the thing about people like her. They're so used to being the loudest thing in any room that when something louder comes along, their brain just locks up. She stood there, mouth open, sunglasses at her feet, and the wall of red and black kept coming. People were shouting now. Move! Move out the way! A man next to me had his hands up to his mouth. The girl, Madison, grabbed her mother's arm and tried to drag her back, and the woman finally stumbled backward, half tripping over her own bag as the front rank of guards swept past the exact spot where she'd been standing. That close, that's how close it was. The march never broke, not for a second. The boots crunched on perfectly in time like nothing had happened at all, because to them nothing had. They'd given the warning. The rest was up to her. And here's the part I'll never forget. As the young guard passed her, as he marched by the woman who'd been so sure the whole world bent around her, I swear his expression didn't change one bit. Not a flicker of satisfaction. Not a smirk. Not even acknowledgement. He just stared straight ahead into the distance like she was a lamppost, like she was nothing, like she was air. And somehow that was the loudest thing of all. The woman stood there shaking, genuinely shaking. Her face had gone from that furious red to a pale, blotchy white, and the crowd, oh the crowd, there was this ripple of laughter, not cruel exactly but relieved. The kind of laugh that breaks a tension. A few people clapped. Someone shouted, "That told you," and a whole section of the railing burst out grinning. Madison was helping her mother gather up the dropped sunglasses, and the woman was muttering something, trying to rebuild her dignity, trying to find someone to be angry at. "That's assault," I heard her say. "That's he could have killed me. Did you see that? Did you see what he did?" But nobody was on her side, not one person, and I think, for the first time that morning, she actually realized it. She looked around at all those faces and not one of them was sympathetic. Not one. The peasants, as she'd called them, were all quietly delighted. She grabbed Madison's wrist and started pushing back through the crowd, but it was different this time. The crowd didn't part for her. People stood their ground. She had to squeeze and twist and say, "Excuse me," actually say it now, and it was slow, and it was humbling, and her face the whole time was a picture of someone whose entire understanding of how the world worked had just been knocked sideways. I thought that was the end of it. A funny story. The pushy tourist who got a 130 decibel reality check from a man in a fur hat. I genuinely thought, that's it, that's my anecdote for the train home, the day I saw a Karen meet the King's Guard and lose. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea that the real story hadn't even started yet. That in about 90 minutes, that same young guard, that same blank-faced, unmovable young man, was going to do something that the woman, and me, and everyone else in that crowd would carry with us for the rest of our lives. Because that morning wasn't going to be about a rude tourist and a stubborn soldier. That morning was going to be about a sound, a different sound, one that none of us were ready for. But I'll get to that. Let me stay here a little longer in the easy part, before everything changed. The guards completed their march. The ceremony went on. The crowd settled back into its happy hum. The woman and her daughter swallowed up somewhere in the back, forgotten already by most. The school groups shuffled. The old men in their folding chairs nodded along like they'd seen it all 1,000 times, which they probably had. I drifted around the side toward the corner of the railings just to get a different view. There was a little bit more space there. The young guard had taken up a post. I could see him from where I stood, maybe 40 feet away. Back to stone again. Eyes forward. The little boy with the funny faces had long gone, and now it was just a steady trickle of tourists drifting past him, snapping pictures, occasionally trying to get a reaction and never getting one. I watched him for a while, I don't know why, maybe because of the way he'd handled the woman, that complete, absolute refusal to be moved. There was something I admired in it. We spend our whole lives bending. Bending for bosses, for difficult relatives, for people who shout louder than us. And here was this lad who simply would not bend. Not because he was stubborn, but because he'd given his word to something bigger than himself. The post. The duty. Whatever you want to call it. I bought a second coffee from a van near the road. Watched the crowd thin out and thicken again as new tourists arrived to replace the ones who'd seen enough. The sun was properly out now. People had their sleeves rolled up. A busker somewhere was murdering an Oasis song. It was, by every measure, a perfectly ordinary, perfectly lovely London morning. I checked my watch. 11:45. I figured I'd give it another half hour and then go find some lunch, maybe wander into the park. Hyde Park was just up the road, you see. 10 minutes walk, maybe less. The green stretching off beyond the buildings. I could see the tops of the trees from where I stood. I remember thinking I'd go and sit by the water for a bit, maybe feed the ducks, clear my head. I never made it to the park. Because at 11:53, I know the exact time because it's burned into me. It was on every news report for weeks afterward. The morning ended. It started as a feeling more than a sound, a pressure, like when a heavy lorry goes past and you feel the air shift, except this came from the wrong direction and it didn't pass, it just grew, and then the sound caught up. I don't have the words for it. I've tried for a long time and I don't think the words exist. It wasn't a bang. A bang is too small a word. It was a thud you felt in your teeth and your ribs and the soles of your feet all at once. A great, deep, wrong sound that came rolling out from the direction of the park, over the rooftops, and slammed into all of us standing there in our t-shirts with our coffees and our cameras. For half a second nobody moved, nobody understood. The mind doesn't want to understand a thing like that. It searches for anything else. A truck backfiring, construction, thunder, even though the sky was clear. Then the screaming started far off, carried on the same wind that carried the smoke. And I looked up past the palace, past the trees, and I saw it rising. A gray-black column climbing into that perfect blue sky, spreading out at the top like something out of a film, except it wasn't a film, it was right there. It was real, and it was coming from exactly where I'd been planning to sit and feed the ducks. That's when the panic hit the crowd. You think you know what you do. We all do, don't we? You watch the news, you see something terrible happen somewhere far away, and somewhere in the back of your head there's this quiet little voice that says, if that were me, I'd stay calm, I'd help, I'd know what to do. We tell ourselves that. It's a comfortable lie. I'm here to tell you it's a lie. Because when that sound rolled over the rooftops and the smoke went up over Hyde Park, I did not stay calm. I did not know what to do. I stood there frozen with a paper cup in my hand, and the only thought in my whole head was a single useless word repeating over and over, no, 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 no. And I wasn't the only one. The crowd outside the palace went from happy to terrified in the space of about 2 seconds. There's no in-between with a crowd. It's like a switch. One moment you've got hundreds of relaxed people taking photos, and the next you've got a stampede, and the awful thing is, it's the same hundreds of people. The same mums and dads and tourists and school kids, just with the fear switched on. Everybody ran, everybody. There was no order to it, no direction. People just bolted, scattering in every way at once, which meant half of them ran into each other. I saw a man go down. I saw a pram nearly tip. I saw a woman lose a shoe and keep running on one bare foot, not even noticing. The screaming was the worst part. Not loud screaming. That's the thing nobody tells you. It was this low, panicked, animal sound coming from everywhere at once. The roped-together school group came apart. Those poor kids in the yellow vests, suddenly all pulling in different directions, and 2 of the teachers shouting, "Stay together, stay with me," in voices that cracked halfway through. I'll always remember one little girl who just stopped dead in the middle of it all, frozen the same way I was, while bodies surged around her. A teacher scooped her up. Thank God. And here's where it gets strange. Here's where the thing I came to tell you about actually begins. In the middle of all that running and screaming and chaos, all those people fleeing, the guards didn't move. Not one of them. I'm not exaggerating, I wish I were. It would be an easier thing to believe. But I was there, 40 feet away, and I watched it with my own eyes. While the entire world came apart, those men in their red tunics and tall black hats stood exactly where they were. Eyes forward, spines straight, rifles held the same as ever. Like the ground itself could split open, and they'd still be standing on their little patch of it when it closed back up. The young guard, my guard, I'd started thinking of him as the one from the morning. He was the closest to me. I could see his face clearly. And I want you to understand something. He was scared. I could see it. He was a kid, 22 years old, and a bomb had just gone off 10 minutes from where he stood, and he didn't know if there'd be another one, and he was terrified. You could see it in the tiny things, the muscle ticking in his jaw, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. A bead of sweat sliding down from under that ridiculous, magnificent hat. He was as frightened as any of us. And he did not move. That's the thing I couldn't get my head around then or now. It would have been so easy. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have written an article about the guard who broke ranks during a bomb scare. They'd have understood. He had every reason in the world to run. He had 2 legs and a heartbeat and the same survival instinct as the rest of us, the one that was screaming at me to get out of there. But he'd been given a post, and in his head somehow that meant more than his own fear, more even than his own safety. I have thought about that more times than I can count. I've turned it over and over. What is it that makes a person able to do that? To stand still when every cell in your body is begging you to run? I don't have an answer. I only know I saw it. I saw a frightened young man decide in the worst moment of his life that he was not going to move, and then I watched him keep that decision second after second after second while the world burned at the edges. Now, I told you the woman would come back into this. The one from the morning. The Karen, if you want to call her that, though I've stopped wanting to. She hadn't gotten far. When the bomb went off, she'd been somewhere out near the road, I think, still working her way back to wherever she was staying. And in the panic, in the crush of bodies all running at once, something had happened. She'd lost Madison. I didn't see it happen, but I saw the aftermath, and I pieced the rest together later. In the stampede, the 2 of them had been pulled apart. And the woman, this woman who'd spent the whole morning treating everyone around her like furniture, was suddenly standing in the middle of the chaos, turning in circles, and the sound coming out of her was nothing like the voice from before. It was high and broken and raw. Madison, Madison, where are you, Madison? And nobody stopped. That's the cruel arithmetic of a panic. Everybody's running for their own life, for their own kids, and they can't stop. They physically cannot make themselves stop, even for a screaming mother. I watch people pour past her like water round a rock. Some of them shoved her. One man knocked her hard enough that she spun and nearly fell, and he didn't even look back, and I don't blame him because that's what fear does. She was on her own, completely on her own. The expensive bag was gone, dropped somewhere or torn off her arm. The styled hair was a wreck. And all that armor she'd worn in the morning, all that do you know how far we traveled, all that I have just as much right, it was gone too, stripped right off her. Underneath it was just a mother who'd lost her child, and she was the most frightened person in that whole frightened place. Here's what I keep coming back to. The morning's Karen and the woman screaming for her daughter were the same person. I want to be honest about that because it would be a neater story if they weren't. It would be easier to tell you about a villain who got what she deserved. But that's not what I saw. I saw a difficult, arrogant, unpleasant woman, and I saw that exact same woman fall apart with terror for her kid, and both of those things were true at once, and I think that's just what people are. Messy. Better and worse than we look. But none of it explains what happened next, because what happened next had nothing to do with whether she deserved it. The crowd was thinning now. The first surge had passed and people were further down the roads, still moving, but the area right in front of the palace was emptying out, which meant you could see across it, which meant you could see things you couldn't see a minute before. And in the middle of that emptying space, near a section of railing, there was a child. It was Madison. She'd gone the wrong way in the panic, pushed back toward the palace instead of away from it, and she'd ended up pressed against the railings, and she'd frozen the same way that little girl in the road had frozen, the same way I had. She was maybe 16, but in that moment she looked about 6. Crouched down with her arms over her head, sobbing, completely overwhelmed, paralyzed by it. And here's the geography of it, because the geography is everything. Madison was on one side of the cleared area. Her mother was on the far side, near the road, screaming her name, unable to see her through the last of the running crowd. And between them, right in the middle, at his post, stood the young guard. He saw the girl before the mother did. I was watching his face, so I saw the exact moment it happened. His eyes were forward like always, fixed on the distance. But something moved at the edge of his vision, and his gaze flicked, just flicked down and to the side, and landed on this terrified kid huddled against the railings with smoke in the sky behind her. And I watched him have the hardest decision of his life, and I watched him make it in about half a second. Because you have to understand what his post meant. These men aren't decorations, whatever the tourists think. They're soldiers, real ones, armed ones. In a moment like that, explosion nearby, possible attack underway, crowd in chaos, their training is to hold, to maintain. The whole reason they don't break ranks is that breaking ranks is exactly what creates more panic, more disorder, and in a genuine attack, abandoning a post can get people killed. The discipline isn't stubbornness. It's the thing that holds when everything else falls apart. Standing still is the job. Standing still is how he protected everyone, by being the one fixed point in a spinning world. He'd held it through the blast. He'd held it through the stampede. He'd held it when every instinct screamed at him to run. And now there was a child, alone, in the open, 2 feet from a road full of panicking people who weren't looking where they were going, and he had to choose between the discipline that had defined his entire being for the last 20 minutes and her. He broke his post. I have never seen anything move so fast in a straight line in my life. 1 second he was stone, the next he was a streak of red. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate once he decided. He went from his post to that girl in what felt like a single motion, and he got between her and the road, put his whole body between her and the danger, and he crouched down to her level, this towering soldier folding himself small, and he said something to her. I was too far to hear it. I'd give a lot to know what it was, but I saw her look up. I saw her stop screaming. Whatever he said, it reached her. It got through the panic. And he put one arm around her shoulders and lifted her up gently, the way you'd lift something precious, and he started moving her away from the road, along the railings, toward the protection of the palace wall. And that's when the mother saw. She saw her daughter being carried by a guard. And for one terrible second, I watched it cross her face. She didn't understand. Her morning brain, her "that's assault, he could have killed me" brain, fired up for half a heartbeat. And then it died, because she saw the truth of it. She saw the boy she'd defied that morning, the one she'd dared, the one she'd called dangerous, with his arm around her child, shielding her with his own body, getting her to safety. And the woman ran toward them, and she was crying, and the sound she made wasn't a scream anymore. It was something else. Relief and shame and gratitude all at once, this raw, broken thing. He handed Madison to her, right into her arms, and the mother grabbed her daughter and pulled her in so tight, sobbing into her hair, rocking her, saying her name over and over, but soft now, "Madison, Madison, oh my God, Madison." And the girl was crying and clinging back, and the two of them just held each other against that wall while the smoke rose in the distance. The guard stood up. And here's the part that I still can't fully explain, the part that makes my throat go tight even now, telling you this. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't even look at the mother. He didn't take a single second to be the hero. The moment that child was safe in her mother's arms, he straightened up, turned around, and walked fast, deliberate, back to his post, back to that exact patch of stone, and he took up his position again, eyes forward, spine straight, rifle held the same as ever, as though he'd never moved, as though none of it had happened. Back to the job. There was still danger. He didn't know if there'd be a second blast. He didn't know what was coming. And the most extraordinary thing wasn't that he'd left his post to save a child. It was that, the instant she was safe, he went back to it. Because the post still mattered. The duty still mattered. He'd allowed himself exactly one exception for exactly one terrified kid, and then he closed the door on it and became stone again. The mother saw him go. She called out after him, thank you, oh God, thank you," and her voice broke completely. But he didn't turn around. He couldn't. He was at his post. And I think she understood, even through her tears, that his not turning around wasn't coldness. It was the most respectful thing he could possibly do. It was him telling her, your daughter mattered enough to break for. And now I have to be the wall again for you and for her and for everyone else still here. I want to tell you the smoke cleared and it turned out to be nothing. I can't, not entirely. It was real. People were hurt over by the park. I learned that later, and I'll tell you what I know in a bit because it matters. But here, outside the palace, in the strange bubble of that emptying square, the worst of the immediate panic began to ebb. The screaming moved further off. Sirens started up, dozens of them, that terrible rising wail layering over itself from every direction at once, the whole emergency machinery of the city coming awake. Police flooded in, real numbers of them now, armed ones, moving fast and shouting clear instructions, and the moment there were instructions, the panic eased, because that's the other thing fear needs, someone to tell it where to go. They were funneling people away from the area, herding the stragglers toward safety, and I got swept up in it along with everyone else. But as I was moved along, I looked back. One last time, I had to. The young guard was still there. Still at his post. Still stone. The smoke still hung in the sky behind him, and the sirens still screamed, and the world was still upside down, but he stood in the middle of it, exactly where he'd been at 9 that morning when a little boy pulled funny faces at him, exactly where he'd been when a furious woman dared him to move, exactly where he'd been when the bomb went off. The same patch of stone. And I remember thinking, and I'm not a religious man, I want to be clear, I don't go in for any of that, but I remember thinking, that is the closest thing to faith I have ever seen. Not faith in a God, faith in a promise. Faith in the idea that some things you do not abandon, no matter what, except for the one thing worth abandoning them for, and even then, only for as long as it takes, and then you go back. The woman and her daughter were gone, swept away with the rest of us toward the police lines. I didn't see where they went. I assumed that was the end of it. I assumed I'd never know what happened to any of them, not the woman, not the girl, and not the young guard who saved her. I was wrong about that. There was more to come. There's the matter of what happened over by the park, which I haven't told you yet, and there's the matter of what happened weeks later, when I learned the young guard's name from a story in the papers, and when I found out something about him that put the whole morning in a light I never expected. But the heart of it, the thing I actually came here to tell you, you've just heard. A man stood his post while the world ran. He broke it once for a child, and then he picked it back up and carried it again. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a woman who'd spent her morning believing the world owed her everything learned, in the worst possible way, what it actually looks like when someone gives you something they owe you nothing for. They moved us back about half a mile, in the end. The police set up these lines, blue tape strung between lamp posts, and they kept pushing the perimeter wider and wider as the morning turned into afternoon. I ended up in a side street near Green Park Station with about 200 strangers, all of us just standing there. Nobody really talking. A few people crying quietly. Most of us just staring back toward the smoke, which was thinner now but still there, a gray smudge on that beautiful blue sky that wouldn't go away. People kept checking their phones. The signal had gone, too many people, all trying to call home at once, the whole network buckling under it. And you'd see someone get 1 bar, 2 bars, dial frantically, lose it again. A woman near me got through to someone and just said, "I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm okay," over and over before the call dropped. An older man was trying to reach his wife and his hands were shaking so badly he kept hitting the wrong numbers. I found a low wall and sat down on it. My legs had gone, properly gone, that bone-deep wobble you get after a shock. The second coffee was still in my hand. Stone cold by then. I don't know why I was still holding it. I think I'd just forgotten it was there. I poured it out eventually and watched it run into the gutter, and that, for some reason, was the moment it all caught up with me, and I had to put my head down for a bit. The news came in pieces, the way it always does. First, the rumors. Somebody's cousin worked near the park and had texted that it was a gas main. Somebody else was certain it was a vehicle. The word bomb went round and then got walked back and then came round again. Nobody knew anything, but everybody said everything, because that's what people do when they're frightened and there's a hole where the facts should be. The truth, when it finally came, was both better and worse than the rumors. It had been a device, a real one, left near the edge of the park by one of the busier paths. And this is the part that the whole country held its breath over for the next few days. It had not gone off the way it was meant to. Something had failed. It had partially detonated, which is why the sound was so strange, so wrong, that great deep thud instead of the sharp crack it should have been. The damage was real. People were hurt, some of them badly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'm not going to dress it up, because the people who were hurt deserve better than to be turned into a nice, clean ending. But it could have been so much worse. The path it was near should have been packed at that hour on a sunny day in May. By every grim calculation, it should have been a catastrophe. And the reason it wasn't, one of the reasons anyway, was a thing I didn't learn until much later. There'd been a man, an ordinary bloke, walking his dog through the park that morning, who noticed a bag left on its own near the path and thought that's not right. And instead of walking past it, the way I think most of us would, the way I'm honest enough to admit I probably would have, he'd flagged down a community support officer. And that officer had started, calmly and quickly, moving people back from the area, not in a panic, just firmly. "Could everyone step back this way, please? Thank you. Keep moving, that's it." He'd cleared a lot of people out of that zone in the few minutes before it happened. A bag that looked wrong, a man who didn't walk past, an officer who moved people back. Those three small, ordinary things, stacked together, are the reason a lot of people who went home that night went home at all. I think about that a lot too. We want our heroes to be dramatic. We want the streak of red breaking ranks. And that's real, I saw it, I'll never stop telling people about it. But there's this other kind of heroism that doesn't look like anything at all. A man with a dog who decided not to mind his own business. That counts. That counts as much as anything. I went home the next day. Back up north to my own flat, my own kettle, my own quiet. And for a while I didn't tell anyone the whole story. I'd say I was in London when it happened, near the palace, I'm fine, and leave it there. Because the rest of it, the woman, the girl, the guard, felt like it belonged to me somehow. Felt too big and too strange to just hand over at the pub. But it stayed with me. The image of him going back to his post wouldn't leave. I'd be doing the washing up and there he'd be in my head, walking back to that patch of stone with his spine straight. I'd be falling asleep and I'd hear that sound he made in the morning, M-A-K-E way, and then the other sound, the deep wrong thud, and the two of them got tangled together in my dreams for weeks. So I started looking, reading everything I could find about that day, and about 3 weeks after it happened, I found him. There was a piece in one of the papers, a proper one, a long one. Somebody had filmed part of it on their phone, not the part with the woman in the morning, but the part that mattered, the part where he broke his post and got to the girl and carried her to her mother. The footage had gone everywhere by then. Millions of views. The young guard in red folding himself down to a terrified kid, shielding her with his body. People all over the world had watched it and wept over it. And I'd had no idea, sitting up north with my kettle, that the thing I'd witnessed with my own eyes had become a thing the whole world had seen. The paper had his name. I'm not going to give it here. Partly because he'd hate it, everything I read about him said he'd hate it, and partly because I think it doesn't matter. He could have any name. He could be anyone's son. That's almost the point. But I'll tell you what the piece said about him, because it knocked the wind out of me. He was 22. From a small town, the sort of place people are always trying to leave. He joined up at 18. And the reason he'd joined up, the reason he'd put on that uniform in the first place was his older brother. His brother had been a soldier too, and his brother had died, not in some dramatic way, in the ordinary, devastating way that soldiers sometimes die in a place far from home, doing a job most people never think about. The young guard had been 15 when it happened. And there was a quote in the piece, from him. He'd given exactly one interview and then refused all the others, and in the one he gave, somebody asked him why he didn't run, why he stood his post when the bomb went off, whether he'd thought about his own safety at all. And he said, and I'm telling you this from memory, so the words might not be exact, but the meaning is burned into me. He said that standing still was the only thing he knew how to give, that his brother had stood his ground in a far worse place than a sunny square in London and never came home, and that the least he could do, the very least, was hold a patch of stone in his own country when it got frightening. He said the post wasn't his. He said he was just looking after it for a bit. He said it the way you'd talk about minding someone's seat on a train. And then they asked him about the girl, about breaking ranks, and he got, the journalist wrote, uncomfortable. He didn't want to talk about it. He said any of them would have done the same. He said it wasn't a decision, it just happened, and he was almost embarrassed by all the attention, like he'd done something he was supposed to be ashamed of rather than the bravest thing most of us will ever see. The post he was proud of, holding the line he understood as duty, but the thing the whole world loved him for, the breaking, the saving, the streak of red, that he could barely talk about. Because to him it wasn't the heroic part. To him that was just the part where he stopped being a guard for a second and was only a person. I had to put the paper down for a while after I read that. The woman wrote to him, "This is the last piece, and it's the one that ties it all together for me, so let me tell it properly." It came out later in a follow-up to the original story. The mother, the Karen, the one from the morning, the one I've tried to be fair to all the way through this, she'd written him a letter. A long one, apparently. She'd had to go through the regiment to do it, because of course she had no way to reach him directly, and the regiment doesn't just hand out soldiers' addresses, and quite right too. I never saw the letter. Nobody did, really. It was private, as it should be. But the bit that got out, the bit that the follow-up mentioned, was that she'd written about the morning, about being rude, about planting herself in his path and daring him to move and calling him dangerous and demanding her daughter film it. She owned all of it. She didn't dress it up. And then she'd written about the afternoon, about how the same man she'd treated like dirt had been the one to put his body between her child and a road full of fleeing people, how he'd given her daughter back to her, how he'd done it without waiting for a thank you, without making her grovel, without ever once throwing the morning back in her face, which, God knows, he had every right to do, and which a smaller person absolutely would have done. She wrote, apparently, that she'd spent her whole life believing the world owed her things, believing she was owed space, owed attention, owed deference, owed her own way, and that it took a 22-year-old who owed her nothing, giving her the only thing that ever actually mattered, for her to understand that she'd had it backwards her entire life. I don't know if people change. I'm cynical enough these days to doubt it, but I'd like to believe that woman went home different. I'd like to believe that somewhere on the other side of the Atlantic there's a teenager called Madison whose mum is just a little bit kinder now, a little bit quicker to say excuse me, a little slower to think the world is in her way. I'd like to believe that, because the alternative is sadder than I want to sit with. And the guard, he never replied to the letter as far as anyone knows, not out of spite. I think because there was nothing to say. I think in his head there was no debt to settle and no apology that needed accepting because he'd never been keeping score in the first place. You can't forgive a debt you never recorded. You just go back to your post. So that's it. That's the whole of it. The day a bomb went off near Hyde Park, and a young man in a red coat and a tall black hat stood his ground while the world ran, broke it once for a frightened child, and then quietly picked it back up again. I've told this story a lot of times now, at the pub eventually, to my sister, to my nephew who's getting to the age where he needs to hear about people like that, and every time somebody asks me the same question at the end. They ask me, what happened to him? Where is he now? And the honest answer is, I don't know. I lost track. The world moved on the way it does, onto the next thing and the next. He went back to being anonymous, which I suspect is exactly what he wanted. For all I know, he's still out there, standing on some patch of stone in the rain, while tourists pull faces at him and he doesn't move a muscle. But here's the thing I always say when they ask. Here's how I always end it. I went looking for a hero that morning and I found one, but he wasn't the kind I expected. I expected someone fearless, someone who didn't feel what the rest of us feel. And instead I found a frightened 22-year-old who felt every bit of it, the terror, the doubt, the screaming animal part of the brain that wanted to run, and who stood there anyway. Who stood there because he was scared, not in spite of it, because being scared and staying is the only kind of brave there is. The other kind, the fearless kind, doesn't exist. It never did. We spend our whole lives bending, for the loud ones, for the ones who shove to the front and dare you to move. And every now and then, if we're lucky, we get to see someone who won't bend, and then we get to see that same person bend instantly, completely, for the one thing actually worth bending for. A kid in trouble. Nothing else. Just that. He didn't move for the woman who demanded it. He moved for the child who couldn't ask. And if you ever want to know the whole measure of a person, I think that's it, right there. Not what they'll stand against, what they'll break for. I still think about the coffee, burning the roof of my mouth that morning. How small it was, how ordinary, how I had no idea, walking down toward those gates in the sunshine, what I was about to see. You never do. That's the last thing I'll say. You never know which ordinary morning is going to show you the best of what a person can be. So pay attention, all of you, pay attention to the ordinary mornings. Because the people standing still while everyone else runs, they don't ask you to notice them. But God, they deserve to be seen.